All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Come in, come in. All right. So tonight we have a very special guest. We actually have a very special topic. So, Andy, before I bring you on and officially introduce you, this topic is so prescient right now, especially for the EFA family, Education First Alliance family, because we've got parents speaking out against critical race theory, against masks, against what have you. We've got teachers speaking out, teachers who are actually employed and want to stay that way if they can help it. So a lot of people taking a lot of risks, and just briefly, what cancel culture is, it's an attempt, really by mob rule, to destroy nonconformists or doubters of prevailing orthodoxy. So for us, we can take critical race theory and say, wow, it's kind of the prevailing progressive orthodoxy, right? And then the doubters are the people that say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? Those are the folks that they get canceled. So without further ado, I want to introduce my friend Andy Pessin. So Andy's a philosopher and has written some killer books. My favorite is 60 Second Philosopher. Is that, just curious, is that your bestseller? Because that one's incredibly awesome.
That's a good question. I actually think I read another book called The God Question, I think is my bestseller, but 60 Second Philosopher also did pretty well as well.
So when I met you, I had read 60 Second Philosopher, and my husband read the God Question. And that's the kind of people we are. I like anything quick, etc. He loves, the noodling around about things. But you've written a lot of other books. You've written The Irrationalist, which is another one that I've read.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, and then Uncommon Sense was freaking phenomenal. That was the second book of yours I read.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And so, you're a philosopher at your core, but you're also a professor. And so you've seen this cancel culture that really probably started on campus.
Yeah.
It filtered down to the parents here now fighting against critical race theory. Tell me about kind of what you've seen on campus.
So, okay, that's campuses have been a hotbed for a good number of years. And, my own particular focus, if you don't mind me mentioning it, as a Jewish person who's been very concerned at the way Israel is treated on campuses, which I think is really shockingly unfair and one-sided, etc. So that's sort of my main, that's what mainly brought me to this issue. But of course, cancel culture in the last few years has just exploded. So let me just first mention, if you don't mind, the books that Sloan was talking about are philosophy books for the general reader. So I did spend a number of years doing very sort of academic philosophy work, but over the past 10 or 12 years, I turned to more sort of popular stuff. And, it's very gratifying when I discover people who read it and enjoy it. So thank you, Sloan. I do appreciate that. And then in the last few years, I've turned to writing some novels as well. So The Irrationalist was a novel, a historical novel about René Descartes, the famous philosopher. And what brings me really here tonight, and I think what triggered Sloan to invite me, was I have a new novel coming out. I just wanted to mention it. It's called Nevergreen, and it is exactly on this topic. It is an academic satire targeting campus cancel culture and the ideological excesses that generate it. It's short and fun, I think, and funny, and the early reviews are pretty positive, so I'm excited about it. But, it's part of my own philosophy, which is to turn something which is really problematic and something that worries me deeply, this cancel culture on these universities, and try to turn it into something positive, at least have some fun with it. And this is my way of pushing back. There's actually lots of different ways of pushing back, and different people are undertaking those ways, and we can certainly talk about them. But my way is to contribute a satirical novel which essentially mocks the phenomenon. So with that in the background, anyone who follows the headlines, who has any eye on campuses at all, knows how these play out, right? So typically a professor, but also as students and sometimes also staff, but typically a professor says something that is against the current orthodoxy, or not even against it. This is what's so frightening. Bad enough if he or she says something against it, but they might just raise a question or want to explore further, or agree with the main idea but disagree with some fine detail, or maybe agree with the main agenda but disagree with the strategy taken to pursue that agenda, right? So you don't even have to be opposed to the thing. You have to merely just not be all in every single detail as the leaders do. So the professor will say something, sometimes in a class or sometimes on social media or sometimes in an article that he or she publishes, and then outrage ensues. It's typically the students, large numbers of students get upset. They petition, they picket, there'll be an online campaign of some sort. They'll demand the university address their concerns and their interests. And typically, in most of the cases, the professor will be subjected to some form of investigation, often discipline, in some cases, termination. There's a number of cases where that's happened. And along the way, while these campaigns go viral, typically, it's really becomes a mob scene of hatred. And what it isn't, and this is what so disturbs me as someone who is attracted to the academy as a career choice and a way of life, what it isn't is not reasonable civil debate about important things. It's not allowing any tolerance for disagreements or even nuance, which is really or should be, or maybe once was, the lifeblood of the university. It's an attempt to silence and eliminate the dissenting voices from campus. There have been so many of these incidents over the last 10 years. The National Association of Scholars keeps a database of professors anyway who've been targeted for cancellation. And when last I checked a few days ago, there were over 180 cases in the last 5 or 6 years that they've looked at. And I already know of a couple of cases that aren't on their list. So that list is not complete. And of course, it's also not finished. We can expect more in the year ahead, I'm sure. So it's a widespread phenomenon. It's a dreadful phenomenon. And the last thing I'll say right now is to those who are targeted by it, it is a traumatic phenomenon. It is a miserable phenomenon. And it is a difficult one to endure and survive, quite literally. Even if you come through it with your job intact, which the majority end up, I think, they keep their jobs, you're shattered and relationships are destroyed. And most importantly, you learn to shut up, right? That's what most people, they don't want to go through that again. So even if they keep their job, that's the last little squeak you'll hear from them. And that, of course, is utterly antagonistic to the whole mission of the university, which is about the pursuit of knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that was more than you wanted to start with, but those are some thoughts on the table.
It was everything that I wanted. I mean,
okay. Good.
This is a silencing technique. And I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. Andy, are you hearing that?
I don't hear any feedback. I occasionally hear a ding when maybe someone enters.
Okay.
But
all right. So what we're seeing here is the same thing that is experienced by professors and students is now experienced by teachers who, as you mentioned, they may love to teach, let's just say a full spectrum of history, which as a teacher, you should absolutely teach America, warts and all. And there's a lot of warts. But it's a teacher that doesn't teach, for instance, that the country is white supremacists and people with white skin are irredeemable, those sort of things. And you're right, teachers that will not go all in on it. We get phone calls all the time. We get messages all the time. We've got a tip line that, hey, not only is my job in danger, I'm begging to be fired at this point because it's just such a miserable experience working. And so it's happening in the faculty lounges of K through 12 as well. We're seeing that, but it's also happening to parents who are rightfully articulating for a good education and an education free of hatred for their little ones. That's somehow now deemed as a white supremacy thing or a white privilege thing, or as we've experienced it. So Andy, I'm going to tell everyone right now how we met, and then for those of you who are in the audience who I know, who maybe I don't know, this story is why I fight so hard here on this battlefield. And I believe that the fight against critical race theory, the fight against Marxism, it's the birth of a movement, what we're seeing. But in 2015, I had my 2 children enrolled in a Jewish day school here in Durham, North Carolina. And my kids were very little. My son was in, I believe, preschool or kindergarten at the time. My daughter was very little. Son came home and said, Mommy, they took the map of Israel down. It hurts people's feelings. Why? And that was the beginning of me saying, wait a minute. what's going on here. I mean, if you know anything about Judaism, you don't really have to understand that central to our religion is the reverence for our homeland. I mean, it's the most mentioned term in the Torah, for goodness sakes, is Israel. And so when I went in and asked questions, Andy, this isn't going to surprise you, but I was called a bigot. What's the matter? You don't want to know the other side of it. Don't you care that Israel is killing people? Don't you care that Israel's an apartheid state? And I was a bigot. And I will tell you, when I first encountered that, I'm not unlike other parents out there who are asking questions that are like, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with being a Southerner, right? And growing up that way. I've never harmed anyone. No one I know. I would never stand by and let anyone do that. What's going on? And so anyway, long story short, I became very uncomfortable putting my children there. I mean, when you're leaving your children somewhere, especially your little children, you have to feel like they're going to be loved and taken care of. And I found a few of the teachers of my children. Andy, I never told you this, but this is 2015 now, but they are leaders in what we now know as Antifa. And so, right, because if you hate Israel.
No surprise, right? Like, because the two movements are close together. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute.
Absolutely. Look, if you love critical race theory, you hate Jews. If you love Antifa, you hate Jews. And so these are the people that were entrusted, okay, Andy, to take care of the kids, as you know. And so we pulled our kids out of the school and we kept our mouth shut. Okay. We were good Jews. We kept our mouth shut. We don't want to sully the community in any way. I mean, and that would have been our preference had it ended there. But what we found is because we took our children out, because we said no, because we did not want this indoctrination in what we now know as critical race theory, the entire Jewish community leadership came down on us. And then the school ended up suing us. And what they did was they had the leader of the, and I can tell you now because it was written in journals all over the country, no one at the time, Andy, had seen this. No one at the time had seen really what we can call an anti-Semitic Jewish community, if you will, but a community bent on critical race theory is what we see now. And so my business was boycotted. We were written about in the media, the local media. We were targeted. We were sued. And it was the most traumatic thing I'd ever been through. And certainly my husband had ever been through. And Andy came to us and said, we're not going to stand for this. We're going to fight back. And the first thing that you did was you said, okay, we're not taking this. This ends today. You put up a petition and we got 1,000 signatures like that. We got a petition. We raised money for our legal defense and we ended up prevailing. It took about, 9 months. And again, as you intimated, pure hell to go through. I mean, everything that you stand for. And in my case, it was my religion. I mean, but my husband and I knew at that point that anyone that wants to put a dime towards the destruction of Israel and of the center of my religion, I'm going to fight them. And when you do enter the arena, you guys, and I always tell you this, understand, be prepared to go the distance, right? You'll never walk alone when you're with our group. That's for sure. Because my mission is to do for you guys what Andy did for me and helped us out. But when you get into that arena and it can be as little, you cannot think you're in the arena, Andy, just by saying, hey, I want to withdraw from the school, or, hey, I don't want this. But immediately you find yourself in the octagon in an MMA thing and you just don't know. And so one of the things that you knew right away because of your experience on campus as a professor, you're like, I've seen this before. This is anti-Israel hatred. What we know now is cancel culture and what we know now as well, it was BDS, but it's the same thing now in CRT. You knew right away. And so I think I've thanked you before, but I'm thanking you again now for what you did for my family.
No, it's a pleasure. And, I don't even remember how I first heard of your story. I'm trying to recall that. But, as soon as I heard of this, and again, this was somewhat idiosyncratic. I mean, this is a really interesting case because you're in a Jewish school and they're hiring some anti-Israel people to begin teaching your teachers. So it's like that internal corruption. And of course, as soon as you resist it, which is amounts in this case standing up for Israel. Israel should be taught correctly and fairly. And as you said, and this is an elementary school, so there's only so much nuance and detail you would do in the teaching of Israel and Zionism in an elementary school. But nevertheless, there's room to teach the warts too. But if you can't even keep the flag up, that's something really, really problematic there. And as soon as you stood up and stand up for Israel, even within the context of this particular Jewish community, which wants to emphasize the warts rather than, I don't know, what's the opposite of warts? The appeal, the good stuff, right?
The rouge,
yeah, right.
Yes.
They want to emphasize the warts. You're labeled a bigot, right? Like that's the thing. You can't even have the intellectual disagreement, which is, I think in a Jewish elementary school, there should be pride of Israel, right? And there's time and space and room to teach the warts, to teach the nuance, to teach the complexities. But if you don't have pride in Israel, what kind of Jewish school is this? You're a bigot. So you can't disagree. You're a bigot. Right. And that case is specifically about Israel. But of course, it is important and to stress, and you've already made this point very nicely, that the cancel culture, which is associated with critical race theory in universities and K through 12, et cetera, and the cancel culture, which is anti-Israel in universities and also increasingly in lower level schools as well, they're the same thing, right? They're officially about two different topics. One is about race in America. The other one is about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And yet, as it turns out, and we can talk a little more about this, it's really the same. It's literally the same movement. And by intention and design, it's the same movement. So to fight one is to fight the other.
Right. Absolutely. And so the interesting thing is that, I fought BDS for a long time. So I went on after that experience to start writing. And I've written for the Federalist, I've written for Daily Wire and others, Allgemeiner, and the regular ones about BDS, which is the boycotting of Israel. And you're exactly right. When you understand, Andy, when you understand this movement intimately and all the players and what the goal is, then you definitely understand critical race theory. And I really got into this over the last 9 months, but there's no getting into it. As you're saying, it's the same model, because look, in Israel, there's a group called the PFLP. That is a terrorist group. It's a group recognized here in the U.S. by the State Department as a terrorist group. That is a Marxist group. So when you're looking at the curriculum of young Arabs in Gaza, for instance, and you're looking at those lessons in those curriculum, there is not a lot of distinction between the hatred that is in critical race theory and the hatred that has been in the movement in Israel. And we've seen what has happened there. I mean, my family lives in Israel, and they've said, 35 years ago, we were, Arabs and Jews, Muslims and Jews, it was completely peaceful. It was wonderful. And then a new education system came in, and it all changed. And that education system, not coincidentally, came with, Yasser Arafat, who wanted a lot of money, wanted prestige, and basically, wanted to enslave and starve the inhabitants of certain Muslim areas and certain Arab areas. And this is what happened. It began with the education system built on hate.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And just, closer to home, in fact, you're ground zero in Durham for the campaign against deadly exchange, right? Which is a perfect example of how the activists in one movement are the same activists as in the other movement here in the United States, right? So this deadly exchange campaign, a number of police departments have done some exchanges with Israel, which happens to know a lot about counterterrorism techniques because of unfortunate experience over the many decades being the target of much terrorism. So a program was started some years back and it's not been very many police departments. And indeed, Durham, I think no one ever even went from Durham. So it was theoretical there.
That's right.
But so this was a chance for United States police departments to learn a little something about counterterrorism from the people who unfortunately have to be experts in it in Israel. And various groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP, began this campaign a few years ago, which they called the Deadly Exchange, claiming in effect that these police exchanges, when American police went over to Israel, what they were being taught there is basically to oppress, persecute, and kill people of color. Because in their mind, Israeli Jews are white and Palestinians are people of color. And of course, American police are primarily white, and who are they persecuting but people of color? And so they began this campaign, and it's entirely based, it's lies and slander. It's what's sometimes even called the blood libel, because what they're trying to do is say that the problems of race relations in the United States between white and black, let's say, are exactly the same problem as Israel versus Palestinians, who are whites oppressing blacks. And even worse, the JVP campaign was claiming that that these police exchanges are responsible for police brutality against blacks in the United States, right? And so they're basically blaming the Jews for the problems, whatever problems there are with police malfeasance or brutality. It's disgusting on so many levels. And Durham, I think, is still so far only the first city and only city that passed a resolution like banning such police exchanges, even though they've never had one, right? So this was all theoretical. It was just a way to get this message out there, this false, defamatory, dangerous, insightful, bigoted, hateful message. That was 6 good adjectives. To get this message that Jews are responsible for police brutality against people of color. And it's just, it's heinous and it's disgusting. But it's the same campaign. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is now seen through American racial lenses, which is totally the wrong lens to look at it through. And then you get to also blame the Jews for whatever problems they see here.
Right. I mean, I was living in Durham at the time. I owned and operated a business in Durham at the time. And, you know, the big driver for me closing my business and moving from Durham was that, I mean, the hatred towards Jews during that time, and Durham's kind of a little town, was off the charts, and it was directed at people of color towards Jews. And of course, during that time, as you're well aware, I mean, we saw many terrifying anti-Jewish flyers being dropped places, graffiti. So as a woman, you know, a Jewish woman that owned a business at the time, and having to go in 5 o'clock in the morning when it's dark and leave when it's dark. I mean, you don't know what the hatred will do, and you don't want to find out. And so, you know, going through that in 2015, where, you know, the school is like a Jewish school, allegedly, we don't like Israel. And then that boom, you know, that drove me from Durham. And then now we're seeing that the same model, right, is that white supremacy is killing people of color. You know, America is built on white supremacy, and those messages being given to preschool now. And there's some preschools here that operate in North Carolina that are state funded, and they're teaching parents that, hey, your child starts to notice race at 6 months old, and at 2 is a racist and needs intervention. I mean, these are the same extremist ideas. And as you intimated, Durham is the epicenter. So you have Durham. You haven't been here yet, but you will be coming to visit me soon. So Durham is right here, and right next to it is Chapel Hill. Now, you know Chapel Hill. It's
I have been down there, actually. So
yeah, okay. And you didn't call? What's the matter with you?
It was before I knew you, as a matter of fact. Okay. It was in the
okay, that I can forgive. And so Chapel Hill is the hotbed of this activism, and it's perpetrated by the very same person. So a woman who is JVP in Durham, the same woman who, Tima Ulan, is she's married to the guy that started JVP and that operates it. She started really operationalizing K through 12 critical race theory in 1998, 2001, and 2004. And it actually incubated in a place in North Carolina called the Public School Forum. I'll be ready to break that news. But it was in combination with, no surprise, from the Obama's Department of Education. And that's how it kind of spread through the United States. And I'll be breaking that as an expose. But I just found it so interesting because, again, Durham, Chapel Hill, that's the area where this radicalism not only has flourished, but has infected the entire country.
No, it's absolutely spreading. William Jacobson, who runs a really interesting website, Legal Insurrection, he's been tracking the spread of CRT. He actually has a database now. So those who are interested in critical race theory and how it's manifesting itself in universities and K through 12 and maybe elsewhere. I don't have the. I can.
I'll have it. I'll get that right up. Legal Insurrection, you guys. Wonderful blog. Bill's great. I mean, they've covered a lot of the stuff that we've done, because we're actually we're rolling up our sleeves, just as I'm doing it really here, metaphorically rolling up our sleeves and going in and reporting on the ground exactly what's going on, because we believe that parents get the facts, they'll be able to fight it.
Right. Right. And he's got this database. I have the link. I'll find it in a second. But anyway, you can go on and you can click on each state. I actually did it just earlier today. I checked it out on Rhode Island, which is where I am, which is, oh, by the way, where Bill also is. And you can see Brown University, which happens to be right around the corner from us in our neighborhood. And I learned today I somehow had missed this when it happened. It came out earlier this spring. It's just a small point, but at Brown University, the Office of College Admissions will implement a plan to increase the representation of Black African American applicants to try to yield a class that is 50% African American, an incoming class, which is stunning. I mean, I'm all in favor of increasing minority representation. I think that's a wonderful thing. But if you just think about that they want their incoming class to be 50%. Not just of color, but Black African Americans specifically, and people always suggest that there's signs of racism when a particular institution doesn't represent the proportion in the population. I don't know what the exact percentage
18%.
of African, but it's 18%, right? So they don't want 18%; they want 50%. So you think about that's such a fascinating, interesting, I think in some ways problematic thing. But that's the type of thing which is captured in this database, because this is the direct outcome of critical race theory, ultimately, which one of its ideas, as I understand, I'm not an expert in it, but what I'm understanding is that in order to correct what they take to be the systemic racism, you have to basically do racism in the opposite direction, right? So you have to discriminate in favor of people of color against, let's say, white people, in order to rectify the problem. And that's clearly what's happening in that particular episode there. So,
it's equal outcomes. So what critical race theory is, and what you're talking about here, more broadly, it's anti-intellectual. It's anti-academic. I'm going to put up a slide for you in a second that I always love to show, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But so we're going from a merit-based, colorblind admittance system to a race-based, purely race-based and equal outcome, not equal opportunity. Equal opportunity is an absolute must. Yeah. Equal outcome. And that's what it's gone on. And so we're looking at, gifted and talented programs. I will agree that we need great ways to get more minorities into the program, right? Maybe a step system, maybe, extra help. I mean, a hand up is the way we want to do it, right? But when we make things race-based instead of merit-based, I mean, that's socialism. That's Marxism right there.
Yeah, no, that is, Marxism, if we understand that to be the basic idea of, in its original form, it's rejecting all class differences. So everybody should be roughly economically on a par or equivalent. It's the equity idea that you just mentioned. Everyone should be the same. And that's exactly what's happening now, right? So with respect to race as opposed to class. So anyway, if for those who want to track this phenomenon as it spreads, and it does seem to be spreading anecdotally, as far as I can tell, Legal Insurrection has that database that you should check out on it.
So I want to just share this screen right quick, because I think when I show this is instructive, but I want to get your opinion, because I'm going to explain to you what this means first. So what you're looking at is from our North Carolina DPI website. And what it's showing you is reading and math scores for 3rd to 8th graders. Excuse me. Yes, 3rd to 8th grade. And then when you see this, and this is over time. So this star is right about 2011, right? That's when Common Core in the state gets implemented. And now you're seeing this red star right here. That's 2019. That's when something called social emotional learning, which now we know has critical race theory embedded in it. This is when this comes onto the scene as a way to close the opportunity or the achievement gap. So what you're looking at here, Andy, is this. You really need a telescope for this. This top line, this says Asians, 3rd to 8th grade, 60.4% now are fully literate and doing well, okay, as of 2019. Used to be 74.7. So the performance has gone down for all groups. But here you can see in one of the criticisms, I think appropriate criticisms for Common Core, is that it did exploit and increase the achievement gaps. You're seeing white here at 42.9. In our state, this is 2018, 2019, you've got 14.3% African-American students who are fully literate in math and in English or in reading. So critical race theory and all of its manifestations are being pitched as a way to close this achievement gap, which is a very real problem.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this, because this is such fascinating statistics. I don't quite know how to interpret them and what they all mean, right? Those are complicated things. But we can all agree that achievement gaps should be closed, right? Like there's something at play when there are achievement gaps between different groups of people. But we can then at least begin to question what are the best methods of that. And the environment we're in now is such that you're not allowed to question, right? You have to either go along with the formula, and you can't even say, well, is what Brown University is doing, if they are really going to make their class by heavy-fisted methods be 50% Black African American, is that the right way to go about it? I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on these things.
But you're a racist.
Well, I certainly would be called a racist, even for just saying, "Is this the best way to go about it?" And I don't know that. And on the surface, what's as someone who's not an expert here, it looks problematic to me because it looks like it will be discriminating again. In order to do that, won't you be discriminating against people of greater achievement and merit just for the basis of race? And that idea is problematic to me. So there must be some better way to close those achievement gaps, I imagine. But I'm not an expert, so I don't want to say more on that. But again, the culture we're in says you raise that question, you're a racist, and that means you're not allowed to raise that question. And that means it's, all in on a method that, I think Sloan's point, that chart was trying to show that this method actually even fails to do the thing that it wants to do, right? So right. You're not allowed to examine the efficacy of the plan either if you're not allowed to raise questions about it. And that's the part that bothers me.
So when we look at that graph was pitched by the school board. So the way it works here, Andy, is that the state school board is appointed. So they're not elected. And they come up with plans to do these things. Well, the board is driven by Jeremiah Wright loving guy named James Ford. And he just loves white people, et cetera. He trashes everyone online. But the point is that if we're sitting around and we've got 13 people that want to solve this problem and one or two bullies, right? You kind of have to go along, and then you end up with a solution that doesn't work for the very people that it's purporting to serve and to work for. And that's the real danger. When we're talking about education in the realm of education policy, this is going on in these boards and these faculty lounges. And like you said, at Brown, this is at Brown, correct? I would imagine in Rhode Island. Yeah. So you're having very real problems in a very real way. If you're in a position of power, you have a very good way to help people, right? I mean, you've got a great opportunity to give people a leg up, but those conversations and those solutions are being stifled because of the threat of cancel culture.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a famous philosopher, 19th century philosopher, John Stuart Mill, has one of sort of the classical books on free speech, on liberty. And, one of his arguments, and to me, it's a very powerful argument, which is that if you care about truth, and don't we all, shouldn't everybody care about like what's true, what works, what's efficient?
You'd be surprised.
No, I know. If you care about truth, then you must tolerate dissent and disagreement, because after all, even if you're pretty convinced that you've got it right, we're all fallible. We're all human beings. There might be something you haven't thought of. There's maybe data you're not aware of, right? Like it is always possible that you've got it wrong. So if you care about truth, you want to hear the opposing points of view, because if only to help you feel more confident that you've got it right, because you can answer those objections. And that's the thing that's killing me about the state of the university today. And, as you were saying very, very nicely, Sloan, a moment ago, like you can care about have the same goal, close the achievement gap, right? That's a really important goal. But unless you tolerate dissent and disagreement and allow people to question, you can't be sure you're going to achieve that. And you may well be achieving a worse aim. And that's, and my concern, again, starting point earlier was with respect to Israel on so many campuses, in the same way that that critical race theory seems to be just the dominant, unquestionable orthodoxy with respect to race issues on campuses. Anti-Zionism has become that orthodoxy on many, many campuses as well. And I'm all in favor of people, advocating for Palestinians and criticizing Israeli policy. That's part of the game, right? And I feel I can meet most of those arguments, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be a Zionist or wouldn't be pro-Israel. I don't want to shut anybody down. I don't want to silence people. People need to be able to articulate their positions. But the increasing orthodoxy on campuses is so anti-Zionist that literally the Zionist students and faculty are getting canceled and silenced and eliminated on campuses. And, and I see so clearly in my eye anyway, this is driven by a kind of basically a hatred of the Jews, just to put it too coarsely. And I see hate taking over the campus and pushing out the quest for truth. And it's heartbreaking.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's got on one side of the ledger a chilling effect on speech. And so that means that parents that want to ask questions about, hey, this is a curriculum. I'm a parent. I want to be involved in this. I want to see what you're teaching, right? Because the transparency is a big thing in our movement, is let's see and let us actually cooperate. Then you're being seen as a problem. I mean, we actually have, teachers who are openly threatening parents on social media. And so we've just gotten, the civil discourse is hanging by a thread even here. And again, this is an environment where teachers need to be trusted, right? We want to see teachers as the beacon of kindness, of understanding, as you put it, of academics is questioning and coming to the right, maybe not the right solution that we agree with, right? But being able to apply, let's say, the scientific method when warranted, or, civil discourse, whatever. We're seeing relationships deteriorate faster than anything I've ever seen covering the campus movement for a long time. There is zero buffer, and here's why. First of all, the public school system, you've got zero accountability, period. They're going to do what they're going to do. No one will get fired. And then you've got teachers unions. And so that means that all of the disagreements, all of the power, it resides in the state. And what people don't understand, and what's interesting, Andy, about fighting this fight that we're in versus the one that we fought with BDS for so many years, is that when you have an agent of the government, and that is always a teacher or a school system or what have you, the government is using speech. The government is using racist propaganda. That's actionable, right? Because that's actually a widespread human rights abuse, which we actually have. And so people are saying wrongfully that, oh, well, this is a free speech issue. No, it isn't. No, it's not, because teachers are an agent of the state. Now, college students, they can opt in or opt out. And I know that's not actually true, but that's how it's seen. So this is a completely different animal when you're talking about young kids and parental rights and stuff.
Yeah, no, it's scary. I know you mentioned parents getting punished and attacked, etc. There was a case in Rhode Island. I believe it was a parent who was just trying to file some freedom of information requests to find out, get more transparency about what was going on in the school. And the school district, I think, either sued her or threatened to sue her to stop her from like this. It was just a crazy situation because, bare minimum transparency. People and parents should know what's being taught in the schools. And I know in a number, there were some they got a lot of publicity, some parents at several expensive private schools. There was one in New York, for example, that were speaking out against the wokeness of the school curriculum and just got lambasted by their community, right? I mean, just absolutely destroyed. And, we talked about the chilling of speech, was the first part of this. It takes incredible courage to stand up and receive abuse, right? And that abuse is, in Israel, it can be threatening. You can get death threats. Yes. People literally get death threats, right? And not to mention called racist and all those other horrible things. It takes courage to stand up to that. And most people don't want to do it. And then so the people who do stand up end up being alone. And what you know is John McWhorter, he's the linguist at Columbia who talks about, wonderful person. I read him quite regularly on these issues. He recently talked about how he knows lots of other people believe what he believes, but they're afraid to speak up, right? And so, if you are the courageous one who's going against your school board or dealing with the teachers or, and battling this in the schools, you're going to stand up there mostly alone, and it's going to be hard, but you have to know in your heart that lots of other people in the room are sharing your questions, sharing your concerns. But when you chill speech, you can't even gauge what public opinion is because people are too afraid to speak up. And that to me is, again, it's a terrible, terrible crime. And that's why it's so important. I so appreciate, Sloan, what you said earlier, that, you reach out to people and you're doing the battling you're doing, because the individual to fight this alone is overwhelming. But if you know you have allies, if you know you have peers, if you know other people think the way that you think, then that gives you the courage. So by, Sloan, you're being out there and being public, people know they're not alone, right? You're hopefully empowering people to do this battle locally, because it has to be fought on every single front. It has to be fought in every single school district, in every single school. Absolutely. And, I know that's what motivates me to reach out to professors when I read about canceling stories, which I read about weekly, at least, typically during the school year. I reach out because I want that person to know, and I don't even only reach out to people I agree with, by the way, right? There are people who said a few things and got canceled, and I thought those things were a little bit on the sketchy side. But cancellation is so evil, right? That even if I don't agree with the thing you said, and maybe even found it offensive in some cases, I'll reach out and say, you're not alone. Stand up, be strong, be brave. Pursue the truth as you see it, because
it's not the truth.
We're all in the same business, the quest for truth, right? Like you would think. You earlier said maybe that we're not, but I like to believe. My default value actually is I believe that most people are operating on good faith, and I am sometimes naive and have to be disabused of that in particular cases. But I like to believe that even the people who are pushing the agenda that I don't agree with, they believe they're doing the right thing, and they believe it's the truth, etc. And so therefore we are all in the same business of pursuing the truth. But if that's true, then we have to tolerate the disagreement. We have to not only tolerate, we have to encourage the disagreement and the dissent, because that's the only way we're all going to get to the truth together. So, again, that's my issue with cancel culture. It's an offense against the pursuit of truth.
Well, it's robbing people of actually having a disagreement. And so what we see so many times is that it's, you can't have a disagreement because you're immediately dehumanized. You're immediately a white supremacist if you disagree. And we've seen that a lot. And I'll tell you, me being a journalist and then going into the field of activism, it's usually not kind of that way. So it's been very weird for me, because I am an ideologue, and I will admit that on this issue, I'm an uncompromising ideologue. I want to protect children. I want to stop critical race theory, but it has led me to portray the truth in a way that is harmful for quote unquote people on my side. You know what I mean? And so I've gone after people, no matter if they've got an R or a D behind their name. It's truly a nonpartisan issue. It's right or wrong. And so you have to understand too, you guys, is that, when you're in a group, right? Because we're Jews, and when we come out, and, with most Jewish people, you're going to disagree with a lot of things. Well, some people that are anti-Israel in the Jewish community, I mean, you're part of the problem. You're a part of the apartheid state, etc. But we're seeing it here too. And so I've stepped out many times. Our team has stepped out many times and said, hey, critical race theory, people are making money off of it. It has to be people on both sides, and you will be persecuted the most by the people in your own in-group. It's called horizontal oppression. It's real. It's something that Jews are uniquely aware of. But John, you're pointing this out. The Christian church is under attack. Read fault lines. Most of my friends are Christian, actually, and they're devout Christian evangelicals. And they're telling me, they're like, gosh, you won't believe what's happening. I'm like, yes, I will. Oh, yes, I will. We've had this problem for a long time. In fact, I told my mother-in-law, this is a joke you only get if you're pro-Israel Jew. My mother-in-law, she asked me my son was bar mitzvahed a couple weeks ago, and she goes, so are you a good Jewish mother? Are you a good Jew? I said, I'm a great Jewish mother. Are you a good Jew? I said, yes, because I don't go to synagogue. And it's a joke that, we can laugh about because there's a little bit of truth to that. But, you're right, John. I mean, I remember walking out of, in 2012, in 2012, early on, when people were, the rabbis were getting up and talking about, at the time, gay marriage, which for me at the time, I thought, okay, it's a valid issue. Should it be talked about during a high holiday service, for instance, right? In other words, it's the timing. It isn't the issue. It's the timing, and it's the bringing the politics in. And so we've seen an awful lot of that, right? Where issues are valid, but you don't expect to hear it in a service. And again, stepping out against that will get you canceled.
Yeah, or issues are valid, but that doesn't mean you have to be shoving it down everybody's throat all the time, including small children, right? Like, and part of my belief that everyone is operating in good faith until I'm disabused of that in particular cases, there's no doubt there were truths and the original insights of critical race theory, right? It's not like this is a hateful thing that was invented from scratch for the personal gain of the people or something like that. There's truths in there, right? And we have to listen to those truths, even if there are excesses that then become problematic, I believe. There are definitely racial issues in this country that need addressing, and those are some of the truths that this theory, starts off with. But then the way it ends up getting manifest and silencing dissent, that's my issue, right? The way it ends up silencing questioning or dissent is where it becomes hits a kind of extremity that makes it problematic.
Right. And so, but I will argue, I will disagree with you, and I'll say it's pretty much Marxist from the inception, and that it puts elements of truth in there, and it explains it all away. Oh, it's white supremacy. And this is nothing new. I mean, this has been going on for a while. And so you take a problem, a real problem that you can see with your own eyes, and this is a huge problem. This is a literary crisis, and this should be all hands on deck to solve this problem. This is a problem, and it's incredibly unjust. But what critical race theory does is it applies a Marxist program to this, and a preposterous solution that not only will not work, it will enslave people who adhere to it. And so that's, I don't see many people that operate in good faith who are the true leaders of critical race theory. Perhaps well-intentioned teachers, and when you show a graph like that, most teachers will say, gosh, I'll do anything to close that gap. But
yeah, no, so I definitely appreciate that. I don't know enough about the leaders and the movements to begin to address that. But again, for me, the problematic point, as soon as a doctrine refuses to allow dissent, then I know something's wrong, right? And even if the starting point, whether it's racial discriminations or inequities in this country, it doesn't mean I'm in favor of equity, but like inequities are problematic in various ways, right? Those are the starting points, and those need to be listened to and addressed. But as soon as you stop allowing dissent, then you've become something else, and that's the clear sign to me.
Right.
And that's the time when I start questioning the good faith of the people who promote it. It seems to me.
I think that's good. What you just said is your litmus test is once you can't disagree, otherwise you're labeled.
Right.
It's okay. And I think that's very helpful for you guys, because I always tell you guys, look, as a parent, do not go in 10 guns blazing at a teacher or a principal. It's not helpful. Maybe they're doing what they think is best, to your point. Maybe they're doing what they are mandated to do. We don't know. And so the first thing always is conversation, right? And evidence. Evidence is the first thing. Evidence is king. You don't want to kick in the door and say, I know there's critical race theory going on. It's evidence. It's, wow, this lesson, can I ask you what the point of it is? Always get into conversation, because I will say, I have found about 70% of the time, this can be cleared up. This meaning troublesome lessons. It can be cleared up with a conversation with a teacher. But you're right. Once you find out that you're not dealing with a broker of good faith,
Yeah.
that's when you take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And stand up. So you don't automatically, guys, have to stand up, in the way that Andy and I are talking about. Again, it's a staged process, and having people, having a love for people and a forgiving spirit, by the way, of people that make mistakes, right? Yes, I taught this lesson. I thought it was cool. I ran into it, across it from a person I respect, and I didn't know. And a lot of times you can actually teach teachers out of that if they're open-minded. But right, the real recalcitrant people are the cancelers, the leader of the movement, etc. And so those are the people that we bring the big guns in. We bring me and our group in against, right? And we kind of expose them. And you know what is interesting, Andy? And I think you've done this too. I've challenged several critical race theory aficionados to debates. I'm up to 4 now. And I said, look, I'll tell you what, I will debate you on the merits of critical race theory in education. And I want to hear how you're going to close the gap. And to make it fair, I will debate all 4 of you at the same time. Crickets.
Wow. Bill Jacobson once did that at Vassar. This was, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. A whole bunch of Vassar faculty had signed some, something like 31, or was it even 50 faculty had signed some petition against Israel. And he said that, I'm happy to come in and debate all of you. The only thing I ask is that I get the same amount of time as you get in total, right? So if you get 10 minutes each, then I get 510 minutes, right? Or whatever.
Oh, wow.
But I'm happy to take on, anywhere from 1 to 50 of you, whoever wants to, and not a single one of them would take him up on that. He actually came to Vassar. So he said, and if no one wants to debate me, I'll just give a lecture on the problems of the anti-Israel movement on campus. But, and it was a well-attended lecture. But all these people who signed the petitions were not willing to come debate someone who actually knew something about the issue, which was really quite fascinating. You could write to Bill Jacobson himself, the legal insurrection guy, and ask him about that. I know he wrote something about that experience, so that's how I know about it. And it's great that you go and debate people, But just to put you try, right? You put it out there, My point about believing people are operating in good faith until proven otherwise, right? Like that's also part of it, because you give people the benefit of the doubt, and you go in, you have those conversations. And in the end, one of my favorite moments of a very well-known cancel moment, I don't know if you remember at Yale University a few years back, this was around 2015, there was a Halloween costume controversy.
Yes.
Right. This was Nicholas Christakis and his wife. He was a professor, and she was also teaching there at the time. And this one happened to be caught on video, where basically, we'll skip all the details, but there were just a group of irate students upset that this professor was defending this idea about Halloween costumes that they didn't like. And they were screaming at him. And there was one young woman in particular who got nicknamed, I think, Screaming Girl or Shrieking Girl, because that, this went viral, this thing. And she's just yelling horrible things at him. And he's standing there absolutely dignified and quiet, and he's listening to her. And at one point, she says to him, "You don't understand." She screams at him, "You don't understand." And he says with such dignity, "I do understand. I just disagree." It was this beautiful moment, because cancel culture means that there's no such thing as understanding and disagreeing. If you disagree, it's because you don't understand, or because you're a racist or a bigot, or, or whatever, or something along those lines. And in that moment, he was standing for the academy, right? Here was this screaming person out of control. And I understand, I'm listening to you. I hear what you're saying, right? Like, I understand your perspective, but in the end, I just disagree. And I thought that was such dignity there, and that captures the problem in a nutshell. We have to allow a space where we can disagree, but still recognize the humanity of the other person. I understand what you're saying makes sense. It's not unreasonable. In the end, I'm not persuaded, right? So it's recognizing the worth of the other person, yet disagreeing, and that's what's not allowed in cancel culture. And just further, one more great point about Nicholas Christakis. This young woman got pilloried on social media for her really out of control behavior.
He took up for her.
He stood up for her. He said,
Yeah.
you know what? You shouldn't judge someone on, 30 seconds out of a life that happens to be caught on video. You shouldn't judge a person. I thought it was so beautiful, right? Because, and I was guilty. We're all guilty. You watch this person, you form your judgments, right? And who knows what her story is? And he said, you know what? Don't judge her by that little clip. And he was 100% right. But that's the lesson here, that these people who you're fighting against, and rightfully fighting against, they, many of them are human beings who are passionate and believe the things they believe. And we have to, at least, I think, give them the benefit of the doubt before we decide that they're terrible, terrible people. And that is also probably good pragmatic advice, because, as you said, if you go in guns blazing trying to destroy the person, you're more likely to shut them up and turn them against you than if you go in, at least initially, let me hear what your thoughts are. Why are you doing this? Will you listen to my thoughts? So you're more likely to be effective.
Yeah. Look, I mean, if someone's an honest broker, I don't have a problem with it. And even, I've always said this about JVP. Guys, JVP is a virulently anti-Jewish and anti-Israel group. There is something admirable and refreshing about critical race theorists or JVP, in that this is our position. They're lockstep with it. I mean, they brand themselves, and they are true to form. It would be great if they could do that and we could debate. That'd be wonderful. But what you do get, and I think makes me insane, are people that are absolutely full of it. Oh no, I'm not promoting that. And then you get into a conversation and it's gaslighting. So I guess, and this is what I want to leave you with, guys. I want you to understand that being frustrated in this movement and in articulating for your kids, it's a movement for you if you've been doing it every day for a year, right? It is frustrating because you're going to get people that are absolutely, nope, this is who I am. This is the way it is. And if you disagree, you're a white supremacist. Or you seem to get people that are like, oh no, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, you don't want your child to know about history. So it's unfortunately ungratifying a lot of times, right? Where that's the space that we're in. And that's why I'm saying, taking some of these low-hanging fruit moments where you can go in and give the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Even if you're not seeing it in your class, do you see anything wrong with this? Because, hey, Miss Smith, I'm just putting up a sheet. Hey, Miss Smith, this is happening in other classes. I mean, in other words, as a parent, as an advocate, you have to take time to take care of yourself. And in this cancel culture world, first of all, what I've always said is, look, I would rather be called a white supremacist. And in this case, Andy, this is how I felt going through the Jewish day school thing. I'd rather be called a bigot. I think I might have even been called an anti-Semite. I'm not sure, probably. I'd rather be called every name in the book than have my children look at me 5 years from now and say, Mommy, why didn't you protect us? And so that's what I want you to remember. It's this sticks and stone stuff. Now, I know cancel culture extends beyond that, and it goes into your job, etc. As Andy pointed out, a lot of times you do live through that. But I mean, EFA is supporting a lot of people right now, teachers included, who are standing up. And I mean, they're facing a lot of backlash. But again, with one person, it's hard. With 10 people, it's much easier. Right. And then with all of us, I mean, right now we're around 30,000 activists in the state or associated groups. We're 26 states in the union. And we just added a very strong Arizona chapter last night. And so, that's a great way, Andy, to insulate you from cancel culture, because best practices, right? You learn from others. You've got the wisdom. The good way to fight the mob mentality is the wisdom of your crowd. And this is a movement that is building. It's going to, I believe, renew our country. I really, really do.
Wow. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, you are doing a great job. And thank you for praying for Israel. Yeah.
I think John was talking about you, Andy.
I'm sure he's talking about you, but I'm not doing that much. You're doing this. This is your fight here, and it's wonderful that you're doing it. What I'm doing is just, if you don't mind, again, just mentioning the novel Nevergreen, this academic satire where I am targeting cancel culture. And, it's about people so committed to ideology, and you mentioned you're ideological, so we could talk about that a little bit, but so committed to ideology that they can't hear anything outside the ideology. That's where ideologies are good. I think actually ideologies, I can defend them in all sorts of ways in a different conversation. But when you're so committed to your ideology, you will only see everything through the lens of that ideology, and you must suppress anything that challenges that ideology. That's when it's a problem. And that's the heart of cancel culture. It's just, at one point, a student starts speaking against the orthodoxy, and a girl covers her ears because she was taught to hear no evil, right? Like, I can't even hear the other side. You have to be silenced and eliminated. And that's, for me, that's the heart of the problem. That's why I wrote that novel.
Right. And so Nevergreen is a play, I'm sure, on Evergreen.
Inspired by Evergreen State College. It's not about Evergreen State College, but it certainly was named for that. That was a very well-known cancel episode, also around 2015 or so, give or take, right? So,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, this is the birth of everything. And again, I unfortunately had to be on the cutting edge of cancel culture in our own Jewish community, but little did I know that really that was one of the first instances we've ever seen of critical race theory, right? So Glenn's bringing up stay in our lane. Glenn, that's interesting because when we are fighting educrats, and Andy, I'm not talking about you, but we have educrats here who will say, I'm a teacher. I know better. Or I am a mom. Right? I pay taxes. And so, yeah, being told to sit down. Yeah. I mean, so we get that, but look, Glenn, we just have to develop some repertoire of, comebacks, if you will. I'm the comeback queen. And so, we've got to have some that are, again, multi-level, right? For the real big problems, we've got some really big responses, but kind of queuing it down. And to your point, it's okay to be compromising about a little chrono, like in your area, that's okay. But if it's everything, that's completely different. But listen, I'm going to leave you guys tonight with this, is that, you will never walk alone when you are with us, right? I mean, we're one phone call away, we're one text away, and we get a lot of that. And so, and by the way, the wisdom of our crowd and our movement is the same thing. If we picked up the phone, Andy, and called any BDS or anti-BDS activist, we would get the same advice. And so what I want to tell all of you guys is that this is nothing new for me, for Andy. And we've been at this for too many years to count, at least 7 years, 6 or 7 years, right? And so everyone is, everyone in the community is like, wow, this came out of nowhere. No, we've been here before. We know this, and the good news is that we pretty much beat it down and beat the the BDS movement kind of down a little bit into a hole, but now it's
back out. Yeah, no, it's back out for sure. Topic for another day.
But anyway, So show us your book one more time. If you need, I guess it's sort of a parody. It's a lighthearted take on a really terrible thing, and that's cancel culture.
Yeah, it tries to get across what it feels like to be canceled, which is not good. And it's critical, as I said, of the commitment to ideology that allows you to not tolerate any sort of dissent, which is the heart of the problem, as I've mentioned. So, and it's fun. It's fun. It's aiming to be fun and funny and entertaining at the same time. So I hope folks will check it out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you, Glenn. All right. Well, thank you, Andy. Have a great night. Have a great night, you guys. And tomorrow night, we're going to have on, just to let you know, tomorrow night, we're going to have on 2 school board members from South Lake, Texas. Andy, I don't know if you heard of this, but they in Texas did a clean sweep of school board. They won all 9 of their seats with a coordinated strategy. And school board is where it's at, right? Taking that on, making sure that that critical race theory is not in the school. And so they won all the seats about 2 months ago, and they're going to come on tomorrow night and tell us how they did it. So, all right.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Good night. All right.